A Night of Possibilities is the 5th episode of the first season of Back to You. This is directed by the wonderful James Burrows, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in this episode. And this one was a roller coaster with regards to how it made me feel about Chuck. I kept going back and forth on my opinions of his character in this particular episode, and I will discuss more about that as things unfold chronologically. It starts off establishing that it's carpool week, so we do spend a bit of time in cars. I've mentioned previously in other TV show discussions, for some reason I just don't tend to find scenes in cars that interesting, and I'll be honest, the scenes inside the cars in this episode were not that interesting either, but there weren't too many of them, so I'm not too bothered. Ryan asks Chuck if he wants to go to dinner with him, and Chuck tells him that actually it's his routine annual night of possibilities where he does 5 things. He takes a walk, he smokes a Cuban cigar, he drinks a scotch, he has a steak, and the 5th thing will be different every night, and it's wherever the evening takes him, which seems like quite an adventure. When Chuck was alone with Kelly said that it was actually quite clear that he would rather spend time alone than time with Ryan, but actually I personally didn't read into that. I picked it up as Chuck having a routine. This is something he does frequently. He likes to do it, and that time to himself is important. So I read the situation very differently to Kelly, but as the episode progresses, Kelly's opinion does actually seem to be very accurate. Gary and Marshall are in the car for a bit. Not the most exciting, as I said. We then cut back to the main building, and we have a very brief news broadcast with the new cameras where Chuck has to look all over the place. Very, very brief. But it didn't really matter that it was short. It made perfect sense. And then Chuck and Kelly are bickering. Apparently Gracie wants to come home early from a sleepover, and I do feel like I don't agree with Kelly's decision to not pick up Gracie from the sleepover, because if Gracie was uncomfortable, it's not very fair to make her stay there. That seems unnecessarily cruel, but maybe this is something Gracie has tried in the past. I don't know. Once they finish bickering, Ryan then comes in and he gives Chuck a present, and it's a mug because he's thankful that he's working there again. And it seems a little bit late in the day to give him this mug, but nevertheless. And Chuck realises that Ryan is doing this nice thing for him. So the words that Kelly said about him rather spending time on his own than with Ryan kind of sat with him in that moment. And he told Ryan that actually he would go to dinner with him. We then have the restaurant scene, really nice space, really nice set design. And while Ryan is perusing the menu and eating bread from the bread basket, Chuck sees a woman at the bar, and he goes over to this woman and hits on her, and she receives this well because she recognises him from the news. And this is when I started to really dislike Chuck's behaviour, because he wasn't being very nice at all. He ends up in a rather funny scene. It is quite comical the way it plays out. But Ryan is, I think he's looking at his phone at this point, and Chuck is trying to get him to hurry up with his food. So he's actually cutting the food up for him and feeding him, and then he gave himself a bit of the food, as I imagine a parent would do when they're feeding their child. And it was rather sweet, but I obviously don't like the fact that he's not really being attentive to Ryan at that moment, and he's more concerned about just getting off with this woman at the bar. And Ryan mentions his ex. He wished he'd proposed to her. So Chuck very hastily tells him to call her. And again, we have more negative displays of Chuck's selfishness here. Ryan calls her, and it doesn't go the way Chuck wanted it to. I imagine Chuck wanted him to call her. She'd welcome him back with open arms. Ryan would no longer be Chuck's problem. And it turns out she's already married, and Ryan is in even a worse mood than he was before. And Chuck calls Kelly, trying to get her to come over to the restaurant to be with Ryan, and Kelly is in her pyjamas, in her dressing gown, but she tells Chuck she's going out clubbing with Montana, and Montana's reaction was brilliant. But I have to say, I completely side with Kelly. The thought of going clubbing, no thank you, I'll stick with the fluffy dressing gown. We then go back to the restaurant, and a very drunk Ryan mentions that there was something between Chuck and Kelly. He's watched many of their previous broadcast tapes, and he saw something between them. And Chuck is about to leave Ryan. Ryan says he's going to have a coffee, then bike home, which doesn't seem safe. I don't think having a coffee will sober him up enough to safely bike home. Initially, this doesn't seem like Chuck's concern, and then it seems like it is, and then it isn't again. Chuck keeps going back and forth with how he wants to handle the situation, and what we ultimately think he does, and I will expand on this in a moment, is he leaves the restaurant with the woman, and we then cut back to Kelly in Montana, and Kelly has decided she's actually wanting to go out clubbing, and she has on this beautiful dress, and she then realises she doesn't want to do it in the end, and I completely understand that. And then Montana mentions that clearly something must have happened at some point between Chuck and Kelly, and that she has, I think the phrase she used was, has the hots for him. And I like the fact that in a very short space of time, two of their colleagues have both mentioned that there has to be something between Chuck and Kelly. And I don't know if they expand on this, I don't know if they just drop the subject now going forward, or if this is going to be a recurring theme throughout until inevitably they either try getting together or they confess what happened. I feel like at some point, and this is me putting my predictions in quite early because there are another 12 episodes, but I feel like at some time the cat has to be out of the bag. They're going to have to, well, I suppose they don't have to, but I feel like it's inevitable that somebody, and actually I would predict either Montana or Ryan, or maybe Marsh, not leaving many other people to be honest, but somebody will find out about Gracie, and then they'll be the only person who knows, and then somebody else will find out, and then it'll just spread, and then eventually everybody will know. But maybe Chuck and Kelly won't know that everybody knows. I am getting a kind of Friends situation here. Maybe that's where my mind is going. But that's what I predict. That is my early game prediction. We'll find out in due course what happens. Back to this current episode, though. We then cut, well, we're still actually with Kelly, and Kelly's saying, absolutely not, I haven't been with Chuck, he's this bad thing, and this bad thing, and this bad thing. We then cut to Chuck, lounging in a chair in his house, and it seems like in that moment, he is just living up to everything Kelly has said, because we assume that the woman at the bar is in the apartment with him or in the house, and that we are reminded that he left Ryan in his time of need. That's not what happened. After a couple of seconds, it allowed us a couple of seconds to sit with these thoughts, to sit with the idea that everything Kelly has just said is true. And then out walks Ryan in a robe. Chuck was there for him after all. And it's so sweet and so moving, and I rather loved it. But as I said, this was truly a roller coaster ride, because Chuck, I didn't have any issue with Chuck wanting to have his night of possibilities on his own. I actually feel like that seems like a very, well, I was going to say a very healthy tradition, but it involves smoking, drinking, and eating steak. So maybe not physically very healthy, but I feel like having that scheduled alone time where there's a sense of adventure as well is actually probably quite healthy. So I don't think personally that there was a problem with him doing that. But the fact that he actually decided to go to the restaurant with Ryan, even if it was to prove Kelly wrong, I believe that that's the real motivation. Even if that's the case, I still think he did a good thing. And then obviously at the restaurant, things just did not play out that way. And then it seems like Kelly's going to be proven right. And at the last minute, that's not the case. And he's actually been really sweet and supportive of Ryan. And it's a real roller coaster with Chuck in this one. But in general, I do like the character. Of course I like the character, but he's definitely a complex one. Really looking forward to finding out what happens going forward. Really looking forward to finding out if my prediction is correct or not. Chances are it won't be correct. But if that's how it plays out, that would be pretty cool. But I'm keen to see what happens next. And for now, I'm rather happy with this episode. I thought A Night of Possibilities was pretty great.